All right, so today's video, we're going to be diving a little bit into my overall training philosophy, and this is just going to be an introduction. I'm not going to touch on everything, and I am going to touch on a lot of these things very briefly. I'm not going to go too in depth like I do on my other videos. I'm tired today. It's been a long week, so we're going to get into it. I'm going to go through a few different recurring themes on the channel and recurring ideas that I have that are basically fundamentals to the way I train and the way that I would promote hypertrophy training in the first place. So to get right into it, I have a list here in front of me. I've got about 10 or 12 things, like I said. So the first one that I want to talk about, and these are in no particular order. First one I have here is going to be the overall 4 main fundamentals of hypertrophy training. So the first one of these 4 is going to be volume. Second one's going to be frequency. Third one's going to be proximity to failure. And fourth and final one is going to be exercise selection. So if you have all these 4 fundamentals in check on your split or on your training program, the only way you can really mess up your progress is basically just outside factors such as diet or sleep. But assuming that's all in check, as long as you have these 4 fundamentals down, there's really no way to mess up your training. And obviously a couple of these can be moderately subjective and they can kind of vary from person to person, but in general, if you're in a reasonable amount of volume that you're measuring properly and making progress off of it, obviously that's going to work. With frequency, if you're training a muscle 1 to 3 times a week, you're going to make some progress. If you are in basically the right proximity to failure, in general, ranging from beginners to advanced, it's going to be about 0 to 4 reps from failure on any given set. You're going to be making progress. And if your exercise selection is a reasonable lift that goes through a full range of motion, that you're training properly with good technique, and you're using the equipment for its proper use, then you're going to make progress. And obviously the exercise selection is the one that I think varies from person to person the most. There are some people that might have mechanical advantages or disadvantages, or even certain injuries that you have to work around. But at the end of the day, if you're utilizing some core fundamental hypertrophy lifts and executing all the rest of the 3 fundamentals, you will make progress. The next one I have here is progressive overload is going to be a byproduct of muscle hypertrophy, not the thing that forces it. So I already have a couple videos explaining my view on this. Basically, the way the industry views this is you have to add 5 pounds and continually challenge your muscles more and more to actually build them. But it's actually the other way around. If you go through an intense workout with the 4 fundamentals, you'll grow and adapt, which allows you to progressively overload and allows you to add the 5 pounds. I'm not going to go too deep in that since I already have 2 or 3 videos covering my thoughts on that. The next one I've got here is accumulating volume and tonnage is going to be number 1 for hypertrophy. And we need to end the focus on adding 5 pounds to every week or every lift. This will come with the proper training, and you can't predict how fast you're going to progress. Obviously, we're going to try and progress as fast as possible, but you just can't force this stuff. I mean, there's like growing muscle comes down to a science. Like there's only so much muscle you can build from a given session or a given training week or month or even year. It all comes down to a science, especially when you're doing it naturally. So what we need to focus on is getting the reps in. We need to get the sets in. Obviously, these all have to be quality. You can't just take a set 10 reps away from failure and expect to make progress. Like, yeah, you're accumulating volume, but that's junk volume. You need to be accumulating more and more volume and weight over time, and this is going to drive your muscles to grow. You can't just think adding 5 pounds on a lift is just magically going to get you bigger. Generally, that's going to be a result of growing muscle, but we need to focus on getting in reps, getting to the sessions, getting them long-term in consistently. Next point I've got here is kind of the lifting timeline and how your focuses and goals and training should shift throughout your training career. The biggest one I have here is to start off, we're all going to be beginners. So I think the biggest thing with beginners and genetics, and this is a topic for another video, but we all have different starting spots. The biggest skill, no matter where you start, is going to be learning the actual skill of lifting and learning the fundamentals and learning the technique. And when I say the skill of lifting, I'm generally referring to your form and technique here. But if you can't properly execute a lift to build muscle, there's no point in actually training it and getting stronger at it. There's just no point. So you have to nail your technique. That's why I recommend a high frequency for beginners. Is you're getting more and more reps in these programs and these splits where you're training every movement at least maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Not more than that, but 2 to 3 times a week for most movements is generally going to be good. It gets you the most practice. You're not getting in like a bro split. That's why generally for beginners, bro splits aren't going to be most optimal, because if you're trying to learn something and you're only actually doing it once a week, you're not going to get a whole ton out of it. It's going to take you forever to actually get your form and technique down. So that's my philosophy for beginner training. As you shift to intermediate training, and this is very subjective too, I'll have a video on this in the future about how to tell if you are intermediate at some point. What you should do at this point is, once you have your form and technique down, you want to maximize a lower frequency split and make all the gains that you possibly can off of that. And when I say lower frequency, I'm generally referring to a 4-day split, which would mean if you're training 6 days a week, you're going to hit every muscle 1.5 times a week. I know you can't really hit a muscle 1.5 times a week, but the way that plays out over long term is going to be you hit a muscle once the first week, twice the second week. So on average, it's going to be 1.5 times a week. And I will release a intermediate and advanced program that goes over that properly and will teach you how to use it. So when I say this, you can't just do low frequency forever. You're not going to get optimal results. What I would say here is that you're going to have to use frequency. So just like beginners, we're going to reintroduce frequency, and this is going to be a tool to break through your plateau. Once you've maximized an entire session, so let's say we start off on an intermediate, basically program or split of your choice. If you're doing 6 total sets per body part per session, that would be, let's say you're doing the 1.5 times a week. So you're doing 9 sets a week. Once we work your way up to doing maybe 15, 16, 17 sets per muscle per week, maybe you hit a plateau there and maybe you can't gain any muscle for a few months. Now that's the time to actually introduce frequency. And the way this program is set up is it allows you to introduce frequency without messing with other areas of your training. That's where you can add in a fresh new set on a new day, and it's going to give you a lot of good gains, because the first few sets of the workout are always going to be most optimal. Diminishing returns does happen throughout a workout. So intermediates, to summarize what I just said, you're going to basically complete the beginner phase. You have the skill of lifting, you have your technique and your form down. At this point, you're going to maximize a lower frequency. So maybe you start off at 6 total sets per session. You slowly work up to maybe 8, 9, 10, 11 per session. Obviously, you're going to get diminishing returns. Once your muscle growth really starts to either slow down or plateau, that's when you're going to add that frequency, and that's when you're going to add that second session in, maybe where you're adding like another 2 or 3 sets to start, and slowly go from there. I'll have a video covering that in the future. So what else do I got here? I always get lost on my Google Docs. I have so many words on them. So last thought for this topic is going to be advanced lifters. So my biggest piece of advice to advanced lifters is that at this point, you have a very, very good foundation. You probably have a very impressive physique, and you're not going to make gains very easily anymore. So the biggest key for advanced lifters is going to be basically maximizing any reasonable hypertrophy training method that you haven't actually used or maximized yet. So if you haven't maximized like maybe a low frequency or a high frequency or barbell lifts or machine lifts, if there's something that you haven't necessarily maximized or mastered yet, that's a perfect opportunity for a new stimulus for your body. Another important thing for advanced lifters is, I think for a lot of people, if you're complacent with your physique and you just want to enjoy your training at this point, train the way you want to. I mean, it's so easy to maintain muscle. And if you're training something that you actually enjoy, like worst case, it's not an optimal training method at all, and you barely gain any muscle, maybe a couple pounds a year, that's still a win in my opinion, because you're maintaining an awesome physique and you're basically loving your training. And at the end of the day, it's like you've kind of earned that. Like if you think that you're happy with where you're at and you're proud of where you're at, like maintain, train the way you enjoy, and maybe in a couple of years again, you have another drive to actually improve your physique that much more. you've maintained your physique and you've enjoyed your training in the meantime, and now you're good to go to basically level up again, if that makes sense. I'll have a video on that as well. I know some of these are new topics to the channel. So next point I've got here, and this is one that I have talked about before, is going to be overall equality among lifts. And we need to end the term accessory lift for hypertrophy. Just the term accessory lift implies that you're only doing that lift to improve something else, as in another lift. And this is just not the way you should view hypertrophy training. This is how you should view powerlifting, 100%, maybe power building too. But you can't have this skewed perception of one thing being more important than the other. If you put all your focus and effort into one thing, you no longer have focus and effort for other aspects of your training, as in other lifts. So view everything as equal, apply your intensity throughout every set, throughout every lift. You can't just have it front loaded and then slowly start to half-ass your training session once a lift is not as exciting. So you got to do the dirty work, guys, is what I'm trying to say here. Next one's going to be ending your attachment to the big three. Once you do this, lots of opportunities will present themselves and your physique will improve. Just like I said a minute ago, if you focus too much on one lift, you won't care as much about the others. So this is something that I speak from experience with. I was so attached and I was just milking the crap out of these big three lifts to the point where I was so tired. I was getting beat up on my joints and I wasn't really making any progress in a building muscle way. So yeah, I was milking out 5 or 10 pounds on a lift here or there, but like at a certain point, it's good to keep accumulating high quality volume and tonnage. But when they're on these super fatiguing lifts, it's like, it's not worth it at all because yeah, sure, you're strong on squat, bench, or deadlift, but at the same time, when you're strong on squat, bench, or deadlift, you have to be super cautious about your volume. You generally can't train quite as close to failure. And even if everything is perfectly programmed, and when I say perfectly programmed, I've talked about that before, there's no way around the fatigue. There really isn't. So we need to end our attachment to the big three, and we need to basically set that aside and refocus our attention to something new. Like, if you've worked your way up to a 450, maybe a 500 squat, and you've never actually tried to like get stronger on a leg press or a hack squat or even a front squat for that matter, put your effort into this stuff. It's a new stimulus. It's a new movement that your body's going to have to learn and adapt to. This stuff's going to be important, and you're basically going to get a crazy good stimulus with very, very low fatigue. So yes, the big three and variations can be good for lifting, 100%. I'm not denying that whatsoever. But we need to expand our horizon a little bit. These aren't necessarily the best lifts for hypertrophy. I would say the big three are probably equal to or slightly worse than other variations when it comes to maybe another barbell lift or machine lift that replicates those movements in a similar way. So let's see. Once these opportunities present themselves and once you kind of end your attachment to the big three, your physique will improve because the new stimulus, like I said. If you focus too much on one lift, you won't care as much about the others. I've repeated that point a couple times here. So my next point here, and one of my other fundamentals in my training philosophy, is that machines, and this is just an example, I'm not actually making a literal comparison right now, machines will make up for what a barbell lacks, and vice versa. A quick example here that's very easy for us to understand is a barbell, you're determining the bar path. You're determining where that barbell goes. So you have to stabilize it. You're recruiting other muscle groups and other areas of your strength to stabilize that movement. When it comes to a machine, you're in a locked-in path. So you can just apply the maximum tension to that target muscle that you're training on that machine. This is also going to go the other way around, where, yeah, a machine won't have to use your stabilization or other strength as much, but a barbell will have to. So what I'm trying to say here is if a lift lacks something, then an alternative might be very good in that area, and it's always going to be vice versa. So there's nothing that's ever going to be good or bad, is what I'm trying to say. And I know that's very simplistic. I'll go more in depth in the future. I don't want to overcomplicate this video. Next point, machines and isolations need to be trained just as seriously as we train the big three. I've made this point a couple times here, but I just want to kind of summarize and conclude this idea right here. you'll get the most gains and you'll get the most out of a lift that you take the most seriously. If you're, let's say you're training bench press, let's say you're doing like a generic like push day. If you take your bench press super seriously and you track your lifts, you film your form and technique, and you program everything out and you take it the most seriously, but then you just go half-ass your dumbbell bench and you half-ass your cable flies, you won't get as much out of those lifts. Not because those other 2 lifts that you do after as accessory work are worse lifts. It's literally because you don't take them as seriously. So we need to end this basically stigma around track your barbell lifts and then isolations, just go in, do what feels right, and doesn't matter, just do the same weight every time. This is a terrible way to think, and you absolutely can progress on these lifts. I've had a video on the importance of tracking your hypertrophy lifts. We need to end this. If you're training for hypertrophy, we need to stop thinking like a powerlifter. Next thing I got here is going to be ending linear progression. I've said this a couple times, but basically when you're training so close to failure and you're training so frequently, like the room for improvement from session to session is so small. And obviously we're going to be making these tiny little jumps forward every session. The problem is if you mess up your diet and maybe undereat a little bit or undersleep a little bit the night before, the room for error that you have and basically the error that will occur in that training session is going to be substantially bigger than that tiny little bit of progress that you probably would be making from session to session. So let's say you're doing a barbell curl and you're doing my method of tracking all 3 sets, the total reps combined. Let's say you're shooting for 30 to 40 reps across the 3 sets. Once you pass 40, you're going to add some weight. Let's say the last time you curled, you got 38 total reps. Today you're expecting to get 40 and have to up the weight next time, and you only get 34. That's probably because there's an outside factor that affected your training, and this is going to happen. I mean, you're going to have these little regressions, and I've talked about this before, but if a regression's happening occasionally and more often than not you're progressing, don't overthink it. You're good. Don't overthink it. If you're regressing just as often or more often than you're progressing, now we have an issue, and you have to reflect on those 4 fundamentals of your training and your outside factors like diet and sleep. But that's obvious. So next one we've got here is going to be not being afraid of higher reps. This is especially going to be true for intermediate and advanced lifters. I was stuck in like that beginner mindset for so long where you have to do 5s, you have to do 6s, 8s, even like a 1, 2, or 3. This is not going to work for every lift, and this is especially not going to work for a lot of isolation lifts, because let's say, quick example I have here is when you're doing tricep pushdowns. When you're a beginner and you're using 25 or 30 pounds, that's going to tire out your triceps because they're super weak. But let's say you're doing 60, 70, 80, 90 pounds on a tricep pushdown. That actually is going to recruit a lot more muscles in your body, even though it's a very simple isolation movement. Like, you can't tell me, if you can tricep push down 80 pounds or whatever, you can't tell me that your core doesn't also tire out. So that's where this comes into play with maybe going a little bit lighter and just, instead of doing 8 or 10 reps, maybe doing 15 or 20 reps. At the end of the day, rep ranges, as long as they're not in the extremes, are pretty much all going to give you very similar results, but you do have to tailor them to that specific lift and to your specific needs. Like, if you're a beginner, yeah, you can do a set of 8 on tricep pushdowns. If you're advanced, you're going to be doing so much weight that other muscles will just have to come into play. And that's just how it is. So if you're intermediate or advanced, you have to be able to realize, okay, there's certain lifts that maybe I should be going a little bit lighter on and doing some higher reps. At the end of the day, if you're doing a set of 8 on pushdowns or a set of 18, you're very likely to get the same results. I'd actually argue that you get better results on 18 once you're an intermediate or advanced, especially advanced lifter. Couple more topics here. So I got 3 more. This one is going to be importance of tracking progress. So why is it that every sport or every type of lifting sport or hobby or whatever you want to call it tracks stats religiously, but we never do for bodybuilding? We just go based on all these subjective matters, like how we think we look and how we fluctuate on a day-to-day. We start manipulating our programs based on like how we feel or whatever. Guys, this is this is the worst way to do things. I'm not saying that if you notice there's something lacking in your physique or a muscle that you realize you want to develop or need to develop comes up, not to do anything about it. But if you're not measuring, the easiest one is going to be, let's say, your arms. So just as an example here, if you're not measuring your arms and you just randomly say, oh, I don't think my arms have gotten that much bigger, and then you change your training entirely, like, that's like the dumbest thing you could do. Like, you have to actually measure your progress. Are you getting stronger on your arm lifts? Are you measuring your arms? Are you measuring your body weight? Like, unless you actually hit a plateau in these numbers, chances are you might have not even hit a plateau. Like, you can't just go based off of feel, because this is such a slow process of building muscle that when you see yourself and you see your arms 24/7, they're right in front of you, like, you're not going to notice this progress. But when you measure and when you take pictures and when you weigh yourself and you track your lifts over months and years, that's when you notice actual progressions. 2 more points. Just because one thing is right, and this can apply to anything within training, whether it's a method or a lift, this doesn't mean that other things are wrong. I've said this a couple times, but just because barbells are good doesn't mean machines are bad. If I say I like machines, it doesn't mean I hate barbells. That's probably as deep as I'm going to go on this one. I've talked about this before, and I don't want to keep dragging out this video. So last topic, and this is just going to be a little bit of a basically preview to one of my next videos, is going to be, there is a difference in real versus bullshit hypertrophy training. So there's a lot of people that will just mock these things that I say, and they think that I'm just somebody promoting like these crazy, like, Instagram fake natty, like, swipe and save workouts, but this couldn't be further from the truth. I'm advocating us to treat hypertrophy training the way that we would treat our compound barbell lifts. There is a massive difference between measuring your volume, doing a realistic amount of volume, frequency, reps, and a decent exercise selection. And there's a big difference between that and just like hammering the muscle from every single angle and doing these like 25 set workouts 2 times a week and focusing on a bunch of like gimmicky isolation movements where you're using like plates for a dumbbell fly or something. Like, there's a mega difference, and I'm not going to go too in depth on it today. I will have a video basically tearing this stuff apart in the future, but there's a mega difference between that artificial and basically bullshit type of hypertrophy training and real legit focusing on the fundamental hypertrophy lifts and actually tracking them and progressing on them like you would for any other lift. So with that being said, that's going to be a fun, exciting video for either this week or next week. But yeah, with that being said, that's all I got for today. So if you have any questions or any ideas for this channel or anything, definitely leave it in a comment, and I'll get back to you and potentially make a video on it. So thanks for watching.